Joining us now, as I said, is fund manager Willy Packer. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced on Saturday Jabiluka will be added to Kakadu National Park. And after Northern Territory government confirmed it would not renew the Jabiluka mineral lease on the advice of the federal government, Albanese. Quote, "This means there will never be mining at Jabiluka. The Mirror people have loved and cared for their land for more than 60,000 years. Our government will work for them to keep it safe," yada, yada. The managing director of Packer & Co. says that Jabiluka is arguably the world's best uranium deposit, the best, with resources in the ground worth over $50 billion. Jabiluka would provide the critical uranium fuel to power 1% of the world's energy grid with carbon-free electricity for the next 50 years. Willy Packer, thanks for coming on Outsiders. You're up in Broome there. Thanks for coming here. This is unbelievable. You're an investor. You're one of the investors, key investor in Jabiluka. You learnt last week that investment, your millions of dollars, that's gone. Tell us all about it and what this means for jobs, for Indigenous Australians, and for the uranium industry.
So, first up, Jabiluka is not the mine you just showed in the picture, which is the old Ranger mine. It's just a bit of land, which is about 40 kilometres north of Ranger. And it's potentially, the Jabiluka deposit of uranium is below the surface by 300 feet and will be accessed as an underground mine with no big mess on the surface. And it can be treated miles away. It can supply 10% of the world's uranium. And as you might know, that at COP28 last year, the leaders of the world vowed to increase nuclear power by threefold by 2050. Now, that's going to need a lot of uranium. And this deposit is the biggest deposit, undeveloped deposit in the world. And it can do 10% of the world's uranium. It can offset 1/300th of the world's carbon emissions. And this is what people, if we're thinking about the environment, it's a dead set winner. You won't see any surface disturbance of any note, and it will do wonders for carbon dioxide. And looked at another way, it could offset 30% of Australia's emissions.
And Willy, you've invested in this mine, so were you consulted about that suddenly goes into Kakadu and that's it? The Prime Minister boasted twice at the New South Wales Labor Conference and then again at Garma Festival yesterday that no uranium mining will ever occur at Jabiluka. What happens to your investment and your investors?
Well, we're not sure. We've got 1,000 investors in my fund that's invested in it. And meanwhile, there's 9,000 other shareholders. And basically, it's been compulsorily acquired. So hopefully, with just compensation from the government, and it's worth, I believe, $2.5–3 billion at the current situation. Because it is blocked by the Mirror people. They've got a permanent veto over developing it. So it wasn't ever going to be developed anyway. But it was always optional. It was always able to be developed. So when the future generations of Mirror decide that they'd like to get 100 or more million a year in royalties, which is what they've been receiving, then they can do it. And meanwhile, the Australian government would receive, it was open today, $500 million a year in tax revenue. So this is huge over its lifetime, and over its lifetime, it would pay for one of the submarines, $10–15 billion to the Australian coffers. And we've shut that down and at the same time increased carbon emissions around the world by 1/300th by not allowing it to happen.
Rita.
100 million in royalties per year. Would there also be job opportunities for the local population there if this project were to go ahead?
The old Ranger mine that you saw before, the open pit that's 50 kilometres south, that employed 100 Indigenous people. And in the area, there's 500 Indigenous people. And the Mirror, which is the group stopping it, the Indigenous owners stopping it, there's 35. So the money was spread around previously. The 100 million that went. Actually, it was 200 million was paid out before that Ranger mine shut, and that was spread around a bit. But mainly, I think a lot went to the Mirror tribe.
James,
what is the objection of the Mirror tribe? Why are they holding out on what seems like it would be a very big win for everybody?
Well, I think the leader's Yvonne Margarilla, and she's always had an objection to it. Her father was the one, I think, who signed up to it and gave it its clearance to go ahead. But she's always objected, and that's her right, and that's great. But in the future, and the people there might well decide we need this money, and it can help. I think you've seen Jacinta Price pushing for that Indigenous people should own their own resource, and they should get the money for themselves and have the right to invest it. And basically, they could get one hell of a lot of money every year for 30, 40, 50 years, depending on, how far this goes down deep. And it's open.
And so what do you make of Prime Minister Albanese at Garma spruiking all these amazing jobs that are going to come along in the future? Oh, it's going to be this and green investments and renewables and all the rest. At the same time, the very same time, as shutting down the proven technology and market for one of the world's great uranium deposits. Is this coherent? Does it make any sense to you?
The problem you have with renewables up there in the Northern Territory is you haven't got a market for the energy. And so you've got a situation where hydrogen doesn't travel well. It doesn't go down pipelines well. It's very corrosive, and it's extremely difficult to transport because it always seems to disappear. It's such a small atom. And so hydrogen economy up there is extremely tricky, and there's not enough demand for electricity. And actually what's happening in the Northern Territory at the moment is they're shutting the Gove alumina refinery in I think in the next 6 years. And then they are shutting Groot Island. And so half the royalties of the Northern Territory, which they receive from the Northern Territory government, will be disappearing over the next 6 years. So it's the Northern Territory is fast becoming a mendicant state, as they call it, where it just relies on payments from the Commonwealth.
Unbelievable. I think Anthony Albanese called that the care economy, where the government will care for you and look after you. Meanwhile, they're shutting down industry. Willy Packer there, an investor in Jabiluka, and this week the Albanese government shuts it down, slams down its future. Thanks so much for talking to us, Willy.